This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Telly Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. China says that it firmly opposes a new U.S. blacklist targeting major Chinese firms. Washington claims companies including Alibaba, Tencent and BYD are supporting Beijing's military. Now, Washington is reportedly pressing Beijing to resume rare earth exports to Japan after curbs imposed over Prime Minister Takaichi's Taiwan remarks squeezed high-tech production. Also, the Philippines has protested what it calls China's illegal floating structure at Scarborough Shoal. Beijing has yet to respond but maintains it has indisputable sovereignty over the reef. And Chinese President Xi Jinping wraps up his first visit to North Korea in 7 years, a visit that some analysts say has elevated Pyongyang's international standing. Well, Beijing said to invest $300 billion to build data centers as it races against the U.S. for supremacy in artificial intelligence. Also ahead, a live fire on Taiwan's coast. Troops simulate destroying an invading Chinese force in a full-scale combat drill. And dining out with man's best friend. Hong Kong is lifting a decades-old ban on dogs inside eateries, but not everybody is happy. China has denounced Washington's latest blacklist targeting major Chinese firms that the U.S. says are helping the military. While the Pentagon list includes tech giants such as Alibaba and Tencent, search engine Baidu, electric car maker BYD, memory chip maker CXMT and YMTC. A pharmaceutical contractor Wuxi AppTech also made the list, along with humanoid robot startup Unitree. Now, LiDAR sensor maker RoboSense, as well as some of the world's biggest solar and battery manufacturers. The update supersedes a list from last year and comes less than a month after U.S. President Donald Trump met his Chinese counterpart in Beijing.
中方一贯坚决反对美方泛化国家安全概念，画设各类名目的歧视性清单，无理打压中国企业。 我们敦促美方纠正错误做法，停止对中国企业的无理打压行径。中方将采取必要措施，坚定维护中国企业的正当合法权益。
Now, the Pentagon's Chinese military companies list is a roster of firms that Washington believes is linked to China's military or related entities. Now, it does not impose any sanctions or prevent them from doing business in America. Instead, the designation serves to increase scrutiny and could potentially impact future investment or contracting opportunities with the U.S. government. Now, the U.S. move targets the so-called military-civil fusion strategy in China that boosts cooperation between civilian innovation and military development. Washington believes certain cutting-edge civilian technologies can be put to military use and could contribute to China's defense capabilities. Now, China has rejected such allegations. And many major firms in the U.S. as well maintain close ties with the U.S. Defense Department. SpaceX, for example, helps launch satellites linked to national security. Now, Palantir helps develop software used by defense and intelligence agencies. And traditional defense firms Boeing and Lockheed Martin have long supplied the U.S. military. And that has prompted critics to ask if similar standards are being applied in the U.S. Now, for more, we have CNA's senior correspondent Tan Yu-Guan joining us live from Shanghai. Yu-Guan, first up, what has been the reactions from those companies involved?
Well, the companies have responded rather strongly. Baidu tells CNA it rejects its inclusion on the list. It says there's no credible justification for adding Baidu and that the suggestion that it is a military company is entirely baseless. It also says that it will use all options to have itself removed. Alibaba, meanwhile, has taken a similar line. It says there's no basis to conclude that it should be placed on the list. It says Alibaba is not a military company, not a Chinese military company, not part of any military-civil fusion strategy. It also says it will take all available legal action against attempts to misrepresent the company. Biotech firm Wuxi AppTech, meanwhile, has also rejected the designation, calling it incorrect and saying that it will take immediate action to challenge it. So these companies are rejecting the basic premise of Pentagon's designation. They are saying they are commercial companies, not military-linked entities. For their reputation, that really matters, because for many of these firms, the concern is not only whether they will lose U.S. defense contracts, they don't really have much of it, it is whether the investors, the partners, their customers, their overseas governments that they deal with begin to view them through a national security lens. We are seeing that sensitivity even in our own reporting too here in our Shanghai bureau. I have been preparing a separate story on Western pharma companies deepening partnerships with Chinese biotech firms. We had already filmed B-roll at one particular Chinese pharma company, and we're waiting for a key interviewee's schedule to free up for the main interview. This was a company with multi-billion-dollar deals with U.S. drug giants and had been open to speaking with us. But this afternoon, its PR team told me they wanted to postpone the interview indefinitely until a less sensitive time, and explicitly cited today's news as one of the reasons. We're not naming the company because that story is unrelated to the Pentagon list, but it does show you how cautious some Chinese firms are becoming in this climate. Oteli?
So I can understand how and why they are being cautious. I mean, because Washington, after all, they've carried out similar actions in the past. But what's the likely impact on the Chinese firms on the list? Or what's different this time around?
Well, in the short term, probably not as much as a full sanctions would have in terms of the impact. This is not the same as being put on the U.S. Commerce Department's entity list, which can directly restrict access to American technology. The Pentagon's list, as you mentioned, does not automatically stop these firms from doing business in the U.S., but it still matters because, first of all, there's a direct procurement effect. From the end of this month, the U.S. Defense Department will be barred from giving business to companies on the list. More importantly, a year later, that restriction expands to indirect procurement, meaning goods or services from listed companies through third parties. For firms like Alibaba, Baidu, or BYD, Pentagon contracts may not be a core business, so the immediate revenue hit may be rather limited. What's more, it's also worth noting that Pentagon is required by law to maintain and update this list. So it's sort of a process that it has to go through, but not some new escalation of a China-US trade war. But the Pentagon still has room to decide which companies meet the legal threshold, and putting names like Alibaba, Baidu, and BYD and Unitree on the list is still a major policy signal. It is really it's the signaling that hurts, because this list tells U.S. agencies, defense suppliers, investors, banks, commercial partners that the Pentagon views these companies through a national security lens, and that can make others more cautious even before more formal sanctions are imposed. Oteli?
Thanks for helping us unpack U.S.-China tensions. I was just talking to CNA senior correspondent Tan Yuguan, reporting to us live from Shanghai. China and North Korea have pledged to deepen cooperation as Chinese President Xi Jinping wraps up his first visit to Pyongyang in nearly 7 years. And Mr. Xi said that the visit marked a new historical starting point in ties. Well, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un described relations as unbreakable.
我愿同总书记同志一道，以这次访问为契机，加强对新时期 中朝关系的顶层设计和战略指引，推动中朝关系与时俱进，得到更大的发展，更好造福两国和两国人民，为地区乃至世界和平稳定和发展繁荣做出积极贡献。
But the significance of the visit may lie less in what was announced and more in how much has changed since Mr. Xi last traveled to Pyongyang in 2019. Back then, China was North Korea's dominant economic partner and diplomatic lifeline. Today, Pyongyang has another powerful backer, Russia. CNA senior correspondent Lim Yeon-suk explores the shifting balance of power.
Chinese President Xi Jinping received a lavish welcome in Pyongyang. The visit, his first to North Korea in 7 years, comes as Beijing and Pyongyang mark the 65th anniversary of their friendship treaty. The two sides agreed to deepen cooperation in politics, the economy, and culture, and defend each other's sovereignty and security. Notably absent was any public mention of denuclearization.
정부는 이번 시 주석 방북을 포함해서 북중 간 협력이 교류와 협력이 한반도 평화와 안정에 기여하는 방향으로 이어지기를 기대를 합니다. 한반도 비핵화는 다수의 유엔 안보리 결의로 확인된 국제사회의 일관된 목표이며 우리 정부는 한반도 비핵화 목표를 흔들림 없이 견지해 나갈 것입니다.
Just a day before the summit, Kim Jong-un's sister, Kim Yo-jong, issued a blunt warning, declaring North Korea's nuclear status irreversible and dismissing denuclearization as a hopelessly outdated dream. Analysts say this set the tone ahead of Mr. Xi's arrival, with Pyongyang signaling its position before talks began.
일단은 이제 국제적 위상이 굉장히 올라가겠죠. 그리고 이제 러시아든 남북 관계든 뭐 북미 관계든 뭐 그 협상 능력에 있어서 협상 그 위상에 있어서 굉장히 높아지는 건 이제 확실한 거고요.
For years, China was North Korea's dominant economic and diplomatic partner. But Russia's growing ties with Pyongyang have changed that dynamic, with military cooperation and trade reducing North Korea's reliance on Beijing. China remains North Korea's largest trading partner. But experts say Pyongyang now has more bargaining power with Beijing than before Russia's war in Ukraine.
어쨌든 이제 북러 관계가 밀착이 됨으로써 중국 입장에서는 중국의 어떤 요구를 좀 더 북한이 더 딜을 하는 그런 입장이 되기 때문에 그래서 이 시점에 또 이제 방문을 한 거 아닌가 싶습니다.
Analysts say the summit reflects a North Korea that is more confident and connected to Russia and now engaging China from a stronger position. The question is how much leverage Beijing still has and whether North Korea's shifting ties have changed the balance in the relationship. Im Yeon-suk, CNA, Seoul.
And we'll be getting more insights on President Xi's visit to North Korea a little later this hour when we speak with William Young from International Crisis Group. Coming up next on East Asia Tonight, Chinese imports of crude oil falling to their lowest in more than 8 years in May as refiners in the Asian nation scale back. And Japan Airlines faces the challenges of declining interest in international travel within the country. We'll hear more about its tactics to deal with that. Hello again, you're watching East Asia Tonight. It is now time for a business news with Roland Lim. So, Roland, tell us essentially how far is China willing to go just to close the AI gap with the US?
Yes, and that answer is making headlines today. Potentially hundreds of billions of dollars. Now, Beijing backing a massive state-led push to build the computing power it needs. Now, Beijing is reportedly looking to spend almost $300 billion over the next 5 years to build data centers and to narrow the AI gap with the US. Bloomberg reports several government agencies are drafting a plan to build a network of computing hubs across the country, with state firms operating the bulk of the data centers. The plan looks to rely heavily on local suppliers such as Huawei, effectively leaving American players like NVIDIA and AMD out of play. This, however, pales in comparison to the amount US hyperscalers such as Meta and Microsoft have set aside for this year alone. But China's plan does not include investments by private companies like Alibaba and Tencent. This would be Beijing's most aggressive act in its AI ambitions, first laid out this year in the country's 5-year plan that covers through to 2030. The government is planning to integrate the country's power grid with the project, more than doubling the projected investment value to more than $700 billion. The Trump administration has reportedly asked China to resume rare earth exports to Japan. That's as concerns rise over the dwindling production of Japanese high-tech goods. Nikkei reports that U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent made those concerns known to Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng when the two met last month. G7 members also discussed China's rare earths curbs when they met last month. And a U.S. official says it's also on the agenda at next week's summit in France. Japanese firms are scrambling to secure supplies of rare earths after China tightened restrictions in January in response to Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi's Taiwan comments. Japanese manufacturers have expressed concerns that production could be disrupted if China's curbs stay in place. Those concerns also spilling over to America. Remember, Japan is one of the world's top makers of advanced diagnostic equipment, and disruptions to rare earth supplies could impact U.S. purchases. China's exports rose at a blistering pace despite pressure from the Middle East war, with booming demand for AI-related products helping to shield the economy. A dollar-denominated outbound cargo grew more than 19% on year, accelerating from the 14% in April and beating forecasts. Imports also rose faster than expected in the same period, widening the trade balance to $105 billion. The tech-related sector providing much of the boost, with semiconductor exports rising 110% and double-digit increases in mobile phone shipments and items like computers and servers. The robust exports helping to widen the trade surplus to $105 billion last month from $84 billion in April. In commodities, Chinese exports of aluminium surged last month as the world's biggest producer ramped up output. The increased aluminium supply is helping to plug the gap caused by the disruption to global supplies in the Strait of Hormuz. Outbound shipments rose 16% from a year ago, reaching 630,000 tons. However, the Middle East conflict is taking its toll on oil imports for the Asian giant. Now, crude imports fell to their lowest in more than 8 years, at a little more than 33 million tons. That's down 29% on year. Now, that's as Chinese oil refiners are cutting back on output, including fuel, with exports of these products falling 24% in the month of May. Now, South Korea's economy grew at its fastest pace in more than 5 years in the first quarter, stronger than previously estimated back in April, and backed by robust exports as well as solid domestic demand. Revised central bank data showed that GDP grew 1.8% in the first quarter of this year from the preceding quarter. That's faster than the 1.7% increase estimated earlier. Now, GDP also was up 3.8% on year, revised from 3.6%. A strong global demand helped drive exports for semiconductors, machinery, and automobiles. South Korea's economy expected to gain further momentum this year, with the central bank GDP growth estimate standing at 2.6%, significantly higher than the IMF and Asian Development Bank forecast of 1.9%. Memory chip makers rebounding in South Korea, helping the benchmark Kospi index rebound 8% after a 3-day drop. Investors snapping up beaten down tech stocks. SK Hynix, as well as, is up almost 16%. That's after announcing plans to partner up with NVIDIA and to build data center. Samsung, as I was about to say, shot up 9% today. Now, the won gaining slightly against the greenback. In Japan, the Nikkei 225 is up more than 2% at the close. Computer chip equipment maker Tokyo Electron notched up gains of close to 9%, while semiconductor equipment firm Advantest gaining 4.3%. Taiwan's weighted index advancing 2.8%. Exports for the economy rising more than expected by 52% on the year in May to $78 billion. That's the second highest value on record, with electronic components and information products providing much of the boost. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index slightly lower, while the Shanghai Composite did add 1.3%. And the second most Shenzhen component gaining more than 3% thanks to tech stocks. The market's rallying following China's stronger than expected trade data. Domestic travel is booming in Japan, but outbound demand has yet to fully recover as the country faces growing environmental pressures. So how is Japan Airlines adapting its strategy to a changing market? Well, CNA's Yasmin Yonker sat down with Japan Airlines Senior Managing Executive Officer Ross Leggett at the IATA Annual General Meeting in Rio de Janeiro.
We do hedge for our domestic fuel supply, so that's hedged in domestic, but internationally we don't. We need to, we have increased fares in some markets. We have introduced, as you said, a higher fuel surcharge. Fortunately, that's enough to cover at the moment. We have to be careful, though. We're looking to the future if we start to see demand drop off, but we haven't so far.
And let's talk about the weaker yen as well, boosting inbound tourism. You just talked about it. It's made travel go more expensive for the domestic customers. What are you seeing in domestic and outbound demand? Why don't you give me a little more color on that? And how is JL then adapting if Japan's domestic market continues to shrink?
Yes. Okay, so if we go to the Japanese demand for overseas travel, if we compare to 2019, leisure traffic demand is still about 75% of what it was. We're down 25%. I think a lot of that has been a change in Japanese mindset, in thinking that international travel is not as attractive as what it was before. We have seen that shift to domestic travel, so for leisure travel within Japan has actually increased past 2019 levels. So we're seeing that change. But it's ongoing as well. And I think the biggest challenge for us will be, how do we encourage young Japanese people to travel more? That at the moment, the passport holder percentage in Japan is about 25%, I think, which is quite low. So we need to stimulate people to travel more, stimulate young people to travel more, and to get that more wanderlust to want to travel internationally again.
How did that wanderlust get killed? Was it just about the weaker yen? Was it the older generation that's influenced the younger one?
I think it was that break of COVID of 4 years of no international travel. And then I think people found more to do with their leisure money. And looking at domestic is one thing, but phones, mobile phones, anything, yeah. That the leisure money is being used separately. Yeah.
So what will you do then to spur tourism, international tourism among the young?
Yeah, so trying to make it more attractive. So making finding a niche market for them. So not necessarily the traditional markets of the US. Maybe parts of Asia will be more interesting, promoting that to the young people. The Japanese government has actually reduced the cost of passport as well. So that we're hoping that will stimulate travel more as well.
Okay, very interesting. Let's talk about noise and emissions as well. In very, very crowded parts of Japan, they're becoming bigger concerns for communities around the airports. How are you factoring environmental and community impact into your fleet, your schedule, and your network decisions?
The communities around the airport, at the moment, one of their biggest concerns is noise levels of arrival. So as we go through our fleet renewal, when we invest in newer aircraft that are more efficient operations and quieter operations, that'll also assist. For efficiency, we're also looking at the turboprop aircraft on some of the smaller, more regional routes. And so that will also maintain frequency as a public transportation and still have the economic and social benefits as well.
And that is your business update at this hour. Oteli.
Thanks so very much, Roland. Right, we're going to go for another break now, but coming up next, China makes no mention of denuclearization as President Xi Jinping wraps up his visit to North Korea. what does that say about the shifting dynamics in Northeast Asia? Well, we'll be asking an expert next. Plus, why a new US radar installation in Palau is being seen as a key move in the Pacific security landscape. This is East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. China denounces a new U.S. blacklist targeting major tech firms, including Alibaba, Tencent, and BYD. Washington says they support China's military. And Washington is also reportedly pressing Beijing to restore rare earth exports to Japan. The move follows curbs linked to Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi's comments on Taiwan, which have hit high-tech production. China and North Korea pledge closer ties as President Xi Jinping wraps up a rare visit to Pyongyang. Both sides agree to deepen cooperation in politics, economy, and culture, but made no mention of denuclearization. For more on that visit, let's bring in William Young, a senior analyst for Northeast Asia at the International Crisis Group. Well, thanks, William, for joining us this evening. Right. So let's just talk about what seems like the biggest signal here, because unlike 7 years ago, the Chinese leader did not reference Beijing's support of denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Well, that's according to published reports anyway. But what does it reveal about perhaps the realities that China now has to work with?
I think, first of all, we need to look at the signaling coming out of Pyongyang right before Xi Jinping arrived yesterday. The North Koreans made it very clear before Xi Jinping arrived that the progress that they've made in their nuclear program is irreversible and also non-negotiable. I think this is a very strong signal, not only to the international community, but also to Beijing in particular, that the North Koreans are committed to holding up and maintaining the nuclear program, and they are not about to give up the progress that they've been able to make. And so I think from the Chinese perspective, at a time when their priority should be shoring up the bilateral relationship and reasserting their influence over North Korea through the traditional approach of deepening economic and trade exchanges, they probably decide that it's better to sidestep the sensitive issue of denuclearization and also focusing on highlighting the more positive and constructive aspect of the bilateral relationship. I think so. This is why we did not see the mention of nuclear program in the readout, but likely the issue still probably is touched upon when the two leaders met privately. But I think at the same time, this also just shows that Beijing now likely is not going to assert too much pressure on containing North Korea's progress on the nuclear program, because they likely feel like it's unrealistic to still, put it as a policy agenda in public at a time when North Korea's determination, but also the progress that they've made realistically simply is too far off for Beijing to still push forward for a denuclearization agenda.
And of course, the strategic landscape has changed considerably since the last meeting. For decades now, China was actually North Korea's indispensable economic and diplomatic partner. But now we fast forward, to the Ukraine war. Russia has appeared as a significant player right here. So how do you think that has changed the way Beijing views its relationship with Pyongyang?
I think the fact that Xi Jinping decided to make his first overseas trip in 2026 to North Korea reflects the level of significance and the sense of urgency that Beijing feels about needing to shore up and strengthen the bilateral relationship. Like you said, for the longest time, China had primarily relied on being North Korea's main trading partner to make sure it upholds the bilateral relationship. But due to the pandemic, the bilateral trade, transportation links have been suspended. And then because of the desperation that North Korea really needs to boost its economy, it finds a more transactional partnership with Russia, where North Korea is providing the ammunition and also manpower that Russia needs in its ongoing war against Ukraine. And in return, North Korea was able to access the oil, some sort of economic support, and also military technology from the relationship with Russia. And so from Beijing's perspective, it is certainly concerned and wary about how this newfound partnership between North Korea and Russia is likely going to reduce its influence over North Korea, and potentially North Korea feeling emboldened after acquiring some military technology that might in fact help it to make further progress in its missile and nuclear program. So from a regional security perspective, but also the overall regional geopolitical dynamic perspective, Beijing sees the need to reassert its influence and revitalize the bilateral links through transportation, through tourism, through trade and economic exchanges to ensure that China remains the most important ally for North Korea, and so that it has an ability to at least manage the potential risks that might contribute to a potential escalation of tension across the Korean Peninsula.
So if that brings us to the question of leverage, do you think China is still shaping North Korea's choices, or is Beijing increasingly adapting to Kim Jong-un's agenda?
I think the power balance between the two countries had certainly shifted over the last 7 years. North Korea now likely is in the strongest strategic position that it has been in decades because of the additional support and I think access and channel of exchange that it found in the relationship with Russia. And so, it now really feels more emboldened and confident that it might be able to have new leverage to come back to secure more concessions and partnerships and cooperation and pledges from Beijing. And so this time around, when we look at how China approaches and characterize the summit, it really is focusing on most of the positive aspects and constructive aspect of the relationship, including the personal relationship between Xi Jinping and Kim Jong-un, how important that is to guide the bilateral relationship, and the wide range of sectors that China has pledged to deepen cooperation, from trade to agriculture to infrastructure to even tech and public health. So, I think this time around, we're really seeing at least North Korea holding a little bit more leverage to set the terms, or at least set the direction of travel for this bilateral relationship. But at the end of the day, I would say China still is going to be the most important external actor and partner for North Korea, simply because of the very limited option that North Korea has to conduct and access the global market. 90% of its legal trade still needs to go through China, and that's not likely going to change, even if it has now an additional partner in the case of Russia.
Oh, great analysis there. Thanks so very much for helping us unpack the significance of this rare summit. Good speaking with you, William Yang, Senior Analyst for Northeast Asia at the International Crisis Group. Now, in other news, the Philippines has taken formal diplomatic action against China over what Manila calls the illegal presence of a floating structure at the disputed Scarborough Shoal. Manila's South China Sea Task Force says that the object was initially spotted at the entrance to the shoal and later inside its lagoon. It appeared to be manned and equipped with a communication antenna. The task force says it will continue to monitor developments and assess the installation. Now, Philippines also says that it will continue to take appropriate actions consistent with international law and in defense of the country's national interests. Beijing has responded to Manila's latest protest, reiterating its indisputable sovereignty over the Scarborough Shoal and insisting its activities are legitimate. Beijing announced plans last year to establish a national nature reserve at the shoal, which the Philippines quickly denounced as a clear pretext for occupation. The nations have long disputed overlapping territorial claims in the South China Sea. Taiwan's military has carried out live fire drills simulating the destruction of an invading Chinese force along its west coast. The exercise took place around Taichung across 8 positions along a 20-kilometer stretch of shoreline. Troops fired rockets, artillery, mortars, and anti-tank missiles to establish a kill zone to stop an amphibious assault. The military says that the exercise was designed to move away from routine firing drills for a more realistic combat scenario with far less preparation time.
我们这次进入阵地的时间都是以实战化的进入时间为主，所以说我相信这一次的训练对于各位弟兄上都是有相当的难度。那我们在下半年还有所谓的战术射击，我们一定会更认真训练。
Taiwan's west coast is considered an area where a possible amphibious landing might take place because it directly faces China. Beijing views Taiwan as its own territory and has not ruled out the use of force to bring the island under its control. Palau's president has welcomed the construction of an advanced U.S. military radar system that he says will strengthen the security of the Pacific island nation. It is one of the few countries with diplomatic relations with Taiwan. Now, the project was proposed in 2017 and is expected to be completed next year. The U.S. had planned to install the system this year, but faced several delays. Once ready, it will be able to detect aircraft and missiles. It's also expected to boost Washington's surveillance network in the Pacific as it tries to rein in China's growing influence. Palau sits along the second island chain that Beijing sees as part of its line of defense. Now, Palau does not have its own military, relying instead on the U.S. for defensive support, and has discussed the possible deployment of U.S. Patriot surface-to-air missile systems. Palau became independent from American trusteeship back in 1994, but its president stressed that Washington remains a key relationship. South Korea's cabinet has approved a presidential decree that will allow $350 billion worth of investments in the U.S. The finance ministry says that's set to take effect this month. And the investment will comprise $150 billion in shipbuilding-related cooperation and $200 billion in various strategic sectors. The decree specified some terms and conditions, including the definition of commercial reasonableness. Seoul defined it as projects that can generate enough revenue to fully cover the principal and interest costs. The trade minister will chair a special committee to review and approve such projects. South Korea will also launch a state-backed investment corporation, which will run for 20 years. Well, all of this comes under a trade deal struck between the two countries last year. Seoul pledged the investment plan in return for a cut in U.S. tariffs on South Korean goods, such as cars. We're going for a break now, but coming up on East Asia Tonight, dog lovers in Hong Kong cheer a new scheme to allow their fur kids in restaurants. Why the city is breaking its decades-old ban. Plus, relief for a city in Japan after a bear that's been spotted frequently is finally captured. It looks like artificial intelligence is transforming the music industry, changing the way songs are written and produced. But as the technology becomes more advanced, it's also raising questions about the role AI should play in creative fields.
Musician Ryan Smith made this song in 15 minutes, and he did it with the help of AI. His process includes just a few steps: write some lyrics, come up with a riff, tell the AI music generator what you want, and let the technology do the rest. It provides Mr. Smith with vocals, additional instrumentation, and smooths out the production.
I'm not the world's greatest guitar player, but even if I were to do maybe some lead fills or some lead guitar, it might not be that clean. Without practicing it for hours and hours and hours, I can do it one, maybe two times into the AI, and then it shoots it back out with a nice, clean, polished product, most times.
He says another benefit is cost. Instead of spending thousands renting a studio and hiring session musicians, he spends $10 on a monthly subscription with an AI music app. Artificial intelligence has become increasingly integrated into music production in recent years. Streaming platform Deezer says AI-generated tracks now represent almost half of all new music uploaded to their platform daily. Mr. Smith says the way the tech has been used in music production has been misunderstood.
There's going to be some people that are going to be really offended by AI because they're in fear of it. So if you do it correctly, I think that you can still get the emotion.
But not everyone is on board with this development. A UN report projected that musicians could see their revenues fall by almost a quarter due to the rise of AI. In 2024, more than 200 artists, including Billie Eilish, Katy Perry and Stevie Wonder, signed a letter against the predatory use of AI for music. One major issue is copyright. Record labels, including Universal Music Group and Sony Music, have sued AI apps, including Suno, for allegedly using millions of copyrighted recordings to train its models. Suno had said that its model had been trained on material that presumably included recordings owned by Universal and Sony, saying it had scraped music files on the open internet. But local singer-songwriter Gareth Fernandez said he believes there aren't enough safeguards to protect artists from having their work stolen by AI developers, considering how challenging it has been for him to make a living through music.
You are basically, stealing the work of artists gone past dead or alive. You are taking away from their revenue stream. But the reality is, music is not exactly a business. It's a passion. It's a hobby. It is not the most lucrative career, right? So even having what little funds you have, you feed yourself, right? And for necessities, you don't have that kind of money to engage a lawyer.
The US Copyright Office had ruled last year that AI-generated work can be copyrighted if it contains meaningful human authorship on a case-by-case basis. As AI becomes more deeply integrated into the production process, one musicologist says it will become more difficult to legally decide how to award copyright protections.
Say you've written the lyrics and you've also sung. The artist is actually singing, the live human being is singing. But maybe you used AI to create the bass line or to do a synth line behind it. So how do you copyright that? Do you only copyright the part that the humans participated in? So it's really a very difficult sort of equation that hasn't been decided. I don't really know a perfect outcome, except I feel that whatever percentage you give the non-human creator will eventually start to diminish the value of the human creator.
But one startup believes there's a way to develop AI music generators ethically. Wobble describes itself as a royalty-free, customized music generator for businesses. It said it works directly with musicians to source the music from them fairly and transparently.
AI is very good at solving for the technical challenges of music. It will always make music very technically rich, very technically nuanced. What AI will never be able to do is account for human vulnerability. AI will never be able to speak for the beauty, the wonder, the fear, and the joy of the human condition.
Well, Hong Kong is launching a new scheme to allow dogs inside restaurants, and it is getting an overwhelming response from businesses. More than double the number of applications have come in for just 1,000 permits. Well, it is good news for the city's animal lovers, but is everyone else keen to dine with dogs? Well, CNA's Geraldine Yap finds out.
Fancy a meal with your furry friend while watching the sunset? You can do this very soon at some restaurants in Hong Kong as the city gets rid of a decades-long ban on dogs inside F&B eateries.
佢主人同啲狗咧，佢哋都係一齊生活噶嘛嚇，咁一齊去餐廳，咁一齊去公園玩，咁餐廳應該都可以嘅嚇。
我覺得 OK 啊，即係如果佢冇整污糟嗰啲地方嗰啲咪 OK 咯，係啊，即係我自己有狗咁，我自己抱住佢咪唔怕佢落地會屙尿嗰啲咯。
There are rules to follow. Dogs will have to be leashed and kept off tables. And restaurants who want to be a part of the new scheme can't serve hot pot and barbecue or dog food, although pet owners are welcome to bring their own. Businesses must also display a sign saying they allow dogs inside, so everyone is aware. The owner of this restaurant, specializing in fish dishes, rushed to get a permit as soon as applications opened. A so-called paw parent himself, Ivan Tong says he wants to serve the crowd that comes to the area for the pet shops and pet-friendly facilities like the Harbour Boardwalk. He knows that not everyone likes dogs, so he wants to create separate spaces for those with and without dogs and to train his staff to handle any unexpected situations.
I would allocate 4 tables for pets, for the pet section, I guess. Yeah, so I would also provide some pee pads, poop bags, or maybe some small sleeping bags for small dogs, maybe a trolley for a big dogs, or even a dog parking outside for some gigantic dogs.
Estimates show that more than 240,000 households own dogs and cats in Hong Kong, or about 9% of total households, creating a significant pet economy. The government has said it wants to create more business opportunities for the F&B industry by allowing dogs to dine inside. And to respond to overwhelming response from restaurants, it says it will conduct a ballot for the 1,000 permits available. But not everyone is keen to dine with dogs.
可能有啲人驚得太大隻，咁所以會唔會限制下個寵物嘅大細咁樣？同埋係咯，同埋你好難證明你自己狗係怪啦，有陣時就係呢個位係好尷尬咯。
卫生对于食客或者对商家来讲，我觉得某种意义上是有一点负担，可能我觉得中间要有一个缓冲区去处理这个可能会更好吧。
On top of hygiene, there is also the issue of air quality and allergies.
What they need to do, just to strictly prohibit them from sitting on the chair or coming up onto the table, which is also against the law. You need to keep a good ventilation indoor. Then air purifier would definitely help, and also to clean up the stray hair when you see them.
Authorities are training 90 officers to inspect restaurants in the first month of the scheme and to brief businesses and customers about the rules. Those who can't maintain standards could lose their pet permit. There are many dog-friendly restaurants in Hong Kong that already allow customers to sit outside with their dogs. Some of these businesses tell me that it's unclear if they will be allowed to continue with these arrangements without the permit, but they're not rushing to apply for it. They're taking a wait-and-see approach, which means they could be operating in a grey area. Hong Kong's restaurants face tough competition, and they're also up against cheaper eateries across the border in Shenzhen. The pet permit scheme is not expected to significantly boost the industry, but it could help restaurants tap into the growing pet economy.
I think the advantage is that they cannot bring their pets across the border. So they can only be in Hong Kong. So the medical service for pets, grooming service for pets, food and catering service, where these are really localized. You cannot use outsource service.
The first batch of 1,000 restaurants can start allowing dogs inside from mid-July. Geraldine Yap, CNA, Hong Kong.
Now, a black bear that sparked panic in a Japanese city near Tokyo has finally been captured after days on the run. Authorities sedated the animal with tranquilizer darts following a nearly 2-hour operation in Utsunomiya. Now, the unconscious bear was then loaded onto a truck and removed from the area. The bear had been roaming neighborhoods and school zones since last week, forcing the closure of all 94 public schools. But this isn't an isolated case. Another bear remains on the loose in Fukushima. The animal has already injured 4 people and is reportedly difficult to catch. Local officials have described the bear as extremely intelligent. Japan has seen a surge in bear encounters, with 13 deaths reported nationwide last year alone. And authorities are now turning to technology, adopting thermal drones and AI-powered tracking systems to counter the bear threats. And I hope you've enjoyed Tuesday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. Thanks for watching. See you again tomorrow.